Marcus rode in silence in the back of the black sedan, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. The sun was just beginning to touch the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was strange to think that the vampires he had just left were now sealed in their chamber, hidden from this light that could destroy them. He was traveling between two worlds now, the sunlit world of ordinary humanity and the shadowed world of eternal beings. The pale men driving him, Marcus realized he should probably learn their names as they were apparently colleagues now, didn't attempt conversation. They simply drove efficiently through the early morning streets, navigating with the ease of people who had made this journey many times before. When they pulled up in front of Marcus's apartment building, one of them finally spoke. "Mr. Holloway," he said, his voice formal but no longer cold, "I am James and this is Robert. We serve the Coven as daylight operatives, managing affairs that require movement during sun hours. We will likely be working together frequently. If you need anything today, anything at all, the phone in your bag has a direct line to us. Use it without hesitation." "Thank you," Marcus said, feeling somewhat surreal about the entire interaction. He climbed out of the car, the messenger bag slung over his shoulder, Isolde's ring heavy on his finger. The sedan pulled away smoothly, and Marcus was left standing on the sidewalk in the early morning light, looking up at his apartment building as if seeing it for the first time. Everything looked exactly the same as when he had left yesterday evening. The same cracked concrete steps, the same slightly crooked mailboxes, the same faded paint on the exterior walls. But Marcus felt completely transformed, as if he had been gone for weeks or months rather than a single night. He climbed the stairs to his third-floor apartment, unlocked his door and stepped into the familiar space. His books were still stacked on every available surface. His laptop sat on his small dining table, surrounded by research notes and empty coffee cups. His life from yesterday was still here, waiting for him as if nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. Marcus set the messenger bag on his couch and opened it carefully. Inside, as Seraphine had promised, he found a phone, sleek and black without any carrier branding. A leather key holder with a single key and a card bearing an address across town. Several books, their covers worn with age. The History of the Bloodborne Covens, Supernatural Anatomy and Abilities, A Practical Guide to Vampire Society. A thick envelope that Marcus opened to find cash. He counted quickly and stopped at $5,000, only partway through the stack. And finally, a handwritten letter on heavy paper, sealed with dark red wax. Marcus broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant, clearly Seraphine's. "Marcus, by the time you read this, dawn will have separated us. Know that we are pleased with your performance last night. You exceeded our expectations in every measure. You demonstrated qualities we had hoped for but dared not assume. Courage, wisdom, compassion, adaptability. You are precisely what we needed, arriving precisely when we needed you. The road ahead will not be easy. You will be challenged, tested, pushed to your limits repeatedly. You will witness things that disturb you. You will learn truths that burden you. You will carry secrets that isolate you from those you once considered peers. But you will also experience wonder beyond imagining. You will gain knowledge that scholars dream of. You will form connections that transcend the ordinary limitations of human existence. And you will matter, truly, deeply, undeniably matter, in ways that few humans ever do. Rest today. Process what you have learned. Tomorrow evening, come to the address on the card at precisely 8 o'clock. We will begin your education properly. We will show you our world beyond that single chamber. We will introduce you to the broader society of the night. Welcome to your new life, Threshold Walker. Welcome to Eternity's Edge. Seraphine, First of the Coven." Marcus read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope. He was exhausted, more tired than he could remember being in years, but his mind was too active for sleep. He moved to his kitchen and made coffee, the familiar ritual grounding him. As the coffee brewed, Marcus examined the ring Isolde had given him. In the morning sunlight streaming through his kitchen window, the dark stone seemed even more unusual. It didn't reflect light at all. Instead, it seemed to draw light into itself, creating a small point of absolute darkness on his finger. When he turned his hand, he could see faint patterns within the stone, symbols or runes that shifted and changed as he watched. The phone Seraphine had provided buzzed suddenly, making Marcus jump. He picked it up to find a text message from an unknown number. "This is Lionel. I wanted to reach out personally to thank you for your openness last night, especially during the feeding demonstration. I know that was difficult to witness. If you ever need to talk about anything, about the doubts or fears that will inevitably arise, please know that I am available. Among the 7 of us, I am perhaps the most sympathetic to the human perspective, having been human myself more recently than some of the others. You are not alone in this, Marcus." Oh. Marcus felt a warmth in his chest at the message. He typed back, "Thank you, Lionel. That means more than you know. I'll likely take you up on that offer soon." The response came almost immediately, "Sleep now. You need rest. We will speak more tomorrow night." Marcus smiled and set the phone down. He drank his coffee slowly, watching the sun rise fully over the city, and thought about everything that had transpired. Less than 12 hours ago, he had been an ordinary researcher with an ordinary life. Now he was a threshold walker, bound by blood and magic to beings who existed outside of human history, carrying secrets that could change the world if revealed. The fear was still there. He would be lying if he claimed otherwise. Fear of the danger he had signed up for, fear of the responsibilities he had accepted, fear that he might fail or disappoint or prove unequal to the challenge. But underneath the fear was something else. Excitement, purpose, the feeling of standing on the edge of something vast and important. His entire life, Marcus had searched for meaning, for questions worth asking and answers worth finding. Now he had access to centuries of accumulated knowledge, to beings who had witnessed history firsthand, to a world that existed parallel to the mundane reality most humans never questioned. The meaninglessness he had feared, the cosmic irrelevance, the idea that his life would evaporate without leaving a trace, that was no longer his fate. His name was written in the Chronicle of Bridges. His blood had sealed the covenant. He was, for better or worse, part of something that would outlast his mortal years. Marcus finished his coffee and finally allowed himself to acknowledge his exhaustion. He moved to his bedroom, pulled the curtains closed against the daylight, and collapsed onto his bed without even removing his clothes. The ring on his finger pulsed with a gentle warmth, and his last conscious thought before sleep claimed him was a quote from somewhere. He couldn't remember where, that seemed perfectly appropriate. "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy." Indeed there were. And Marcus was going to spend the rest of his life learning about them. Marcus woke in the late afternoon, his body heavy with the kind of sleep that follows extreme stress. For a moment he was disoriented, unsure whether the previous night had been real or some kind of vivid dream. Then he felt the weight of Isolde's ring on his finger and knew with absolute certainty that it had all been real. He spent the afternoon in a strange state, going through the motions of normalcy while his mind processed the extraordinary. He showered, ate mechanically, tried to do some work on his laptop but found himself unable to concentrate. Eventually he gave up on productivity and turned his attention to the book Seraphine had provided. The History of the Bloodborne Covens proved to be a revelation. Written in multiple hands across what appeared to be centuries, it was part history book, part anthropological study, part philosophical treatise. Marcus learned that vampires organized themselves into covens, typically 7 to 12 members, that functioned as extended families or small communities. These covens were led by a first, usually the oldest or most powerful member, who made final decisions on major matters but operated more as a coordinator than a dictator. Seraphine's coven, Marcus learned, was called the Coven of the Twilight Veil, and it had existed in various forms for over 800 years. The current members had been together as a group for approximately 2 centuries, though individually they ranged in age from Isolde's 400 years to Ravenna's 1,000 plus. The coven controlled significant territory, essentially all of the metropolitan area where Marcus lived, and maintained complex relationships with other covens across the country and internationally. Marcus was deep into a chapter about vampire law when his new phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is James. We will arrive to collect you at 7:45 p.m. Be ready." Dress comfortably but professionally, you will be meeting individuals beyond the core coven tonight. J. Marcus glanced at the clock. It was already past 6. He had less than 2 hours to prepare himself mentally for whatever came next. He dressed carefully, choosing dark slacks and a button-down shirt, professional enough to be respectful but comfortable enough to move in if necessary. He slipped Isolde's ring onto his right hand, where it settled with that same strange warmth. He packed the messenger bag with the books, phone, and cash, unsure what he might need but wanting to be prepared. At exactly 7:45 p.m., his phone buzzed with a text. "We are outside." Marcus took a deep breath, locked his apartment, and descended to find the same black sedan waiting. James and Robert nodded to him as he slid into the back seat, and they pulled smoothly into traffic. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked. "The address you were given," James replied. "It's a property the Coven maintains as a meeting space and educational facility. You'll be spending significant time there in the coming weeks and months." They drove across the city as night deepened around them. Marcus watched the streets transition from his modest neighborhood to increasingly upscale areas, finally turning into a district of historic buildings and old money. The sedan pulled up before an impressive townhouse that looked like it dated from the Victorian era. 3 stories of elegant stonework, tall windows currently covered by heavy curtains, a discreet entrance up a short flight of steps. James came around to open Marcus's door. "The Coven awaits you inside. Enter when you're ready. We will remain here until you're finished for the evening." Marcus climbed the steps and found the door unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped into a foyer that took his breath away. Where the exterior had been Victorian elegance, the interior was a mixture of periods and styles. Ancient tapestries hung beside modern art, furniture from different centuries arranged in harmonious groups, lighting that ranged from genuine candelabras to subtle modern fixtures. It was a space that honored history while embracing the present. "Welcome." Lyanna emerged from a doorway to his right, and Marcus felt relief at seeing a familiar face. She was dressed differently than the previous night, simpler, more modern, in dark pants and a flowing top rather than the elaborate gown. But her crimson eyes glowed just as brightly, and her blue-black wings were folded neatly against her back. "This is beautiful," Marcus said, gesturing at the space. "It serves many purposes," Lyanna explained as she led him deeper into the townhouse. "Meeting space as James told you. Library and archive for sensitive materials we don't keep at our primary residences. Training facility, we have a reinforced basement where you'll learn combat skills. And occasionally, sanctuary for vampires who need shelter or assistance. This is, in many ways, the heart of our operations in this city." She led him to a large room on the second floor that appeared to be a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with books that ranged from ancient volumes to modern publications. A large table dominated the center of the space, and seated around it were the 7 vampires from the previous night, plus 3 others Marcus didn't recognize. Seraphine rose as Marcus entered. "Punctual. Excellent. Marcus, you remember my sisters from last night? Tonight we expand your circle. Allow me to introduce additional members of our extended coven." She gestured to a male vampire with sharp features and silver-gray hair who appeared to be in his 40s at the time of transformation. "This is Stefan. He serves as our legal advisor, managing the human institutions and paperwork that allow us to exist in modern society without raising suspicions. He is also an expert in vampire law and tradition." Stefan nodded to Marcus, his expression assessing but not unfriendly. "Welcome, Threshold Walker. I look forward to working with you." Next, Seraphine indicated a female vampire who appeared younger than most of the others, perhaps mid-20s at transformation. Her features were Asian, Japanese, Marcus thought, and her hair was cut in a modern style. "This is Yuki. She is our technology specialist, managing digital security and cyber operations. She will teach you how to move through the modern technological landscape without leaving traces that could endanger us." Yuki smiled and it was surprisingly warm. "Hello, Marcus. I'm actually excited to work with you. Most of the others are still struggling with smartphones. Having someone current with modern technology will be refreshing." The third new vampire was male, tall and broad-shouldered with dark skin and an athletic build. And this is Marcus, yes, you share a name, whom we call Marcus the Elder to distinguish. He handles physical security and investigation of potential threats. You'll train with him in combat and survival skills. Marcus the Elder extended his hand, and when Marcus shook it, he felt the incredible strength in that grip. Welcome to the family, namesake. I'll do my best not to break you during training. Marcus wasn't entirely sure that was a joke. Now, Seraphine said, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat at the table, we begin your education in earnest. Over the coming weeks, you will spend your evenings here, learning everything you need to survive and serve in this role. Tonight we start with fundamentals. Vampire physiology, capabilities, and limitations. You need to understand what we are at a biological and supernatural level if you're going to work effectively alongside us. For the next 3 hours, Marcus received what amounted to a graduate-level seminar in vampire studies. Ravenna led most of the discussion, her 1,000 years of existence lending her observations particular authority. He learned that vampires were not, technically, undead, they were transformed living beings, their biology fundamentally altered by a supernatural force that modern science could not explain. Their hearts beat, though slowly, perhaps 10 times per minute rather than the human 60 to 80. They breathed, though they could hold their breath for hours if necessary. Their blood, the dark luminescent substance he had seen Morgana draw, was a complex mixture that served multiple functions, transporting nutrients from consumed human blood, healing injuries, and maintaining the supernatural alterations to their bodies. He learned about their strengths: speed far beyond human capability, strength that increased with age, healing that could close most wounds in minutes, senses heightened to supernatural levels. Seraphine explained that she could hear Marcus's heartbeat from across the room, could smell the specific composition of his sweat, could see in the dark as clearly as humans saw in daylight. But he also learned their vulnerabilities. Sunlight was genuinely lethal, exposure would cause immediate burning, and death would follow within minutes for younger vampires, perhaps an hour for ancient ones. They required human blood to survive. Animal blood could sustain them temporarily but left them weakened and eventually would lead to a kind of starvation madness. Decapitation killed them permanently, as did burning their bodies to ash. Wooden stakes through the heart would paralyze them but not kill them unless they were left exposed to sunlight while immobilized. The myths got some things wrong, Morgana interjected during a discussion of vampire vulnerabilities. Garlic doesn't harm us, though the smell is unpleasant. Crosses and holy water have no effect. We're not demonic, despite what the churches claim. We can cross running water just fine. Invitation into homes is not required, though there are supernatural etiquette rules about entering another supernatural being's established territory without permission. Marcus scribbled notes frantically, trying to absorb the flood of information. Yuki noticed and smiled. Don't worry about memorizing everything tonight. We'll provide you with reference materials and you'll be living this knowledge soon enough. It'll become second nature. The discussion shifted to vampire society and politics. Stefan took the lead here, explaining the complex web of territories, alliances, and ancient feuds that defined relationships between covens. Marcus learned that there was no single vampire government, but rather a loose confederacy of councils that met irregularly to address issues affecting multiple covens. Think of it as similar to international relations between human nations, Stefan explained. We have territories that are generally respected, treaties that govern interaction, and diplomatic channels for resolving disputes. But we also have old grudges, territorial conflicts, and occasionally open warfare between covens or factions. Your role as Threshold Walker will sometimes include serving as a neutral party in disputes, carrying messages between groups that refuse to meet face to face. That sounds dangerous, Marcus observed. It is, Stefan acknowledged. Which is why you'll be trained extensively in negotiation, diplomacy, and self-defense before we put you in any such situations. As the night progressed, Marcus felt his understanding of vampire society deepening and complexifying. These were not simple monsters or romantic fantasy figures. They were a complex civilization with history, culture, internal politics, art, philosophy, everything that human societies had just hidden from human view. Around midnight, Seraphine called for a break. "We've been talking for hours. Marcus needs sustenance, and I think we could all benefit from less formal interaction." The group moved to a different room, a lounge with comfortable seating and a surprisingly well-stocked kitchen. Marcus was given food and water, and he realized he had been so focused on learning that he had forgotten he was hungry. As he ate, the vampires arranged themselves around the room in casual postures that made them seem almost human. Isolde settled onto a couch beside him, her young face showing the exhaustion that her 400-year-old mind must have felt. "How are you processing all of this?" she asked quietly. "It's an enormous amount of information in a short time." "I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose," Marcus admitted. "But in the best possible way. This is what I always wanted. Access to knowledge that nobody else has, understanding of things that exist outside normal human experience. It's overwhelming, but it's also exactly right." Isolde smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 17-year-old girl she appeared to be, rather than the ancient being she was. "I'm glad. I was worried you might regret your decision in the cold light of day." "Did you?" Marcus asked. "Regret your transformation, I mean?" Isolde's expression grew distant. "Every single day for the first century," she said softly. "I was changed without my consent by a vampire who thought I was beautiful and wanted to preserve that beauty forever. I didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. I spent decades hating what I had become, mourning the mortal life I had lost, the aging and changing and natural death I would never experience." She looked at Marcus with those ancient crimson eyes and that teenage face. "But after a century something shifted. I began to appreciate what I had gained rather than only mourning what I had lost. The knowledge I had accumulated, the history I had witnessed, the relationships I had formed with others like me. I realized that meaning isn't something you're given, it's something you create. And I could create meaning across centuries, could contribute to something larger than any single human lifetime. That realization saved me from despair." Marcus felt the weight of her story. "Thank you for sharing that," he said. "I think I needed to hear it." The break ended, and the group reconvened for the final portion of the evening's education. This time the focus was practical. Protocols for communication, emergency procedures, recognition signals for other supernatural entities, basic self-defense principles. Marcus the Elder demonstrated some basic defense techniques, moving Marcus through positions and blocks with surprising gentleness given his obvious strength. "You'll never be able to overpower a vampire in direct combat," he explained. "But you can learn to avoid strikes, to escape grapples, to create opportunities to flee. That's what we'll focus on, survival and evasion rather than victory." By the time Seraphine finally called an end to the evening session, Marcus's head was spinning with information and his body was tired from the physical demonstrations. It was nearly 3 a.m. "You've done well tonight," Seraphine said as the group prepared to depart. "Tomorrow evening we'll continue with history. You need to understand the major events that have shaped our society. For now, go home, rest, and begin reading the materials we've provided. James and Robert will ensure you get home safely." As Marcus descended to the waiting sedan, Lyanna followed him out. "Marcus," she called, and he turned. She moved close, her expression serious. "I want you to know that you can ask questions about anything, without fear of judgment. If something we teach you contradicts information you've learned from human sources, ask about it. If something troubles you morally, express that concern. If you're confused or frightened or uncertain, speak those feelings. We need you to be genuinely yourself in this role, not some idealized version of what you think we want. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, touched by her concern. "I understand. Thank you, Lyanna." She smiled and stepped back, her wings spreading slightly in what Marcus was learning to recognize as a gesture of pleased affirmation. "Good. Now rest. Tomorrow night we delve deeper." Over the following weeks, Marcus's life transformed completely. His days were spent sleeping late to recover from the long nights of education, doing minimal work on his old research projects, and preparing for the evenings with the coven. His nights were consumed entirely by the vampires, learning, training, absorbing centuries of accumulated knowledge. The history lessons were perhaps the most fascinating and disturbing aspect of his education. Ravenna served as primary teacher for this subject, and her first-hand accounts of events that Marcus had only read about in books gave him a perspective no human historian could match. She told him about the fall of Constantinople in 1453, which she had witnessed personally from within the city. The humans remember it as the end of the Byzantine Empire, she said, her ancient eyes distant with memory. But for vampire society, it was a catastrophe. Multiple covens had maintained holdings in Constantinople for centuries. When the city fell, we lost libraries, artifacts, entire lineages of vampires who chose to burn rather than flee. The knowledge that was destroyed in those days, she trailed off, shaking her head. Your human historians talk about lost books and manuscripts. They don't know the half of what was actually lost. Marcus learned about vampire involvement in human conflicts across centuries. Vampires had served as advisors to kings, generals, religious leaders. They had influenced wars, revolutions, political movements, always from the shadows, always carefully hidden, but undeniably shaping human history in ways that no textbook acknowledged. We are not puppet masters, Seraphine clarified when Marcus expressed concern about this manipulation. We do not control human civilization. But we exist within it and our actions inevitably affect it. A vampire advising a medieval king might suggest a diplomatic solution to avoid a war, not for altruistic reasons, but because war disrupts our feeding grounds and threatens to expose us through increased scrutiny. The king makes the final decision, but our input shapes his options. The moral complexity of this troubled Marcus, and he said so during one evening session. Doesn't that make you responsible for human suffering when your advice leads to bad outcomes? If you're influencing decisions, you're not innocent bystanders. Stefan, the legal expert, fielded that question. You're correct, and it's something we grapple with constantly. We have, as a society, developed ethical guidelines around intervention in human affairs. We are generally prohibited from actions that would cause mass death or suffering unless necessary for our survival. We cannot, for instance, start a war simply to create chaos that makes feeding easier. We cannot deliberately spread disease or famine. We cannot use our powers to create human thralls who serve us without free will. That particular practice was outlawed among most covens centuries ago as both immoral and dangerous. But we also cannot simply abstain from all involvement, Morgana added. We live in human society. We depend on human blood. We are affected by human politics and economics and social changes. Complete non-intervention is impossible. So we do our best to intervene in ways that serve both our interests and human well-being, and we accept that we sometimes fail at that balance. Marcus was also trained extensively in supernatural combat and survival. Marcus the Elder proved to be a demanding but effective teacher. Night after night in the reinforced basement of the townhouse, Marcus learned how to fall without injury, how to escape from grabs and holds, how to use a vampire's superior speed against them by anticipating rather than reacting, how to recognize the signs of supernatural threat in time to flee. You will never win a straight fight against a vampire, Marcus the Elder emphasized repeatedly. Accept that. Your goal is always survival and escape, not victory. If you find yourself in combat with a hostile vampire, you have already made serious mistakes. But if you're forced into that situation, you need reflexes and techniques that give you a chance to get away. The training was brutal. Marcus accumulated bruises and strained muscles despite his teacher's care. But he also noticed himself improving, moving more efficiently, reacting more quickly, developing an almost unconscious awareness of his surroundings that he had never possessed before. Yuki taught him digital security and modern technology from a vampire perspective. He learned about encrypted communications, how to move through digital spaces without leaving traces, how to research individuals and organizations without alerting them to his interest. He learned which technologies vampires struggled with and why. Their inability to appear in mirrors extended to certain types of cameras and sensors, requiring constant adaptation to avoid detection. The modern surveillance state is one of our greatest challenges, Yuki explained. Cameras everywhere, facial recognition, digital tracking of financial transactions and movements. We have to be constantly creative about avoiding these systems while still living in a world that increasingly expects everyone to be monitored constantly. Perhaps most valuable were the casual conversations during breaks. Moments when the vampires would share stories from their pasts, answer Marcus's questions about their personal experiences, offer perspectives that no amount of formal education could provide. One night, during a break from history lessons, Marcus asked Kira how she had become a warrior when most of the vampires he had met seemed more scholarly or diplomatic. Kira considered the question, her expression thoughtful. "I was a warrior before my transformation," she said. "This was in 1487 in what you would now call Scotland. I was born to a minor noble family, and from childhood I was fascinated by combat. My father thought it was a phase I would outgrow, but I persisted. I learned to fight, to ride, to lead. When war came, as it always did in those times, I fought beside the men, though I had to disguise myself initially." She smiled at the memory. "I was good at it. Very good. I survived battles that killed experienced warriors." And that caught the attention of a vampire who had been observing the conflict, looking for someone with exactly my skills. He offered me transformation, promised me centuries to perfect my abilities, to become something beyond merely human capabilities. I accepted. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "Sometimes," Kira admitted. "I miss the sunlight, miss the simplicity of mortal life. But I have become something extraordinary, Marcus. I am one of the finest warriors in vampire society, known and respected across covens. I have protected my family, my coven, from threats that would have destroyed them. I have purpose and meaning and the satisfaction of being excellent at something difficult. That is worth the cost." As the weeks progressed, Marcus began to meet vampires beyond Seraphine's core coven. Representatives from other covens would visit the townhouse, ostensibly on diplomatic business but clearly also to assess the new threshold walker. Marcus learned to navigate these interactions, showing respect without subservience, demonstrating knowledge without arrogance, making it clear that he served Seraphine's coven specifically but could be trusted to interact fairly with others. One such visitor was Lord Victor, an ancient vampire who led one of the largest covens on the East Coast. He arrived one evening in the 6th week of Marcus's training, accompanied by an entourage that included 2 other vampires and several human servants. Victor was imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with features that suggested Eastern European origin and eyes that glowed with a crimson light more intense than any Marcus had yet seen. His presence filled the room in a way that even Seraphine's didn't, an aura of age and power that made Marcus's instincts scream danger. "So," Victor said, his accent placing him somewhere in what had been the Austro-Hungarian Empire, "this is the famous new threshold walker. Seraphine speaks highly of you, Marcus Holloway. She tells me you passed her trials with unusual distinction." "I did my best, my lord," Marcus replied, using the formal address Stefan had coached him on for elder vampires. Victor circled him slowly, assessing. "Seraphine's coven has not employed a threshold walker in decades. The last one, as I recall, proved disappointingly fragile. Lasted only 3 years before a heart condition killed him. Tell me, are you in good health? Do you intend to survive long enough to be useful?" It was a test, Marcus recognized, Victor pushing to see how he would react to being questioned or belittled. "I'm in excellent health, my lord, and I intend to serve faithfully for many years. But I'm also realistic about human mortality. I will contribute as much as I can for as long as I can, and I hope that will prove sufficient." Victor stopped his circling and laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Well said. Confidence without arrogance, realism without weakness. You have trained him well, Seraphine." "He trained himself," Seraphine replied. "I merely provided the knowledge. His character was already formed when he came to us." The meeting with Victor lasted several hours, during which Marcus was questioned extensively about his understanding of vampire society, his intentions, his loyalties. By the end, Victor seemed satisfied. "Very well," he pronounced. "I will recognize your threshold walker, Seraphine, and I will instruct my coven to afford him the respect and protection due to his position. Marcus Holloway, should you find yourself in territory I control, You may call upon me for assistance if needed. It was, Stefan explained later, a significant endorsement. Victor's approval would carry weight with other covens, making Marcus's work easier and safer. Not all interactions went so smoothly. One night in the 8th week, Marcus encountered a vampire who clearly did not approve of the threshold walker concept. Her name was Natasha, and she led a small but aggressive coven that occupied territory bordering Seraphine's. She had come to the townhouse to discuss a territorial dispute, and she made no effort to hide her contempt when introduced to Marcus. "A human," she spat, her Russian accent thick with disdain. "Playing at being one of us. This is why your coven grows weak, Seraphine. You surround yourself with inferior beings and pretend they are equals." Marcus felt anger rising but forced it down. Reacting emotionally would only confirm her assessment. Instead, he met her gaze steadily. "I have never claimed to be your equal, Lady Natasha. I am human with all the limitations that implies. But I serve a purpose in bridging our peoples, and I serve that purpose competently." "Purpose?" Natasha mocked. "You serve no purpose except as food that has not yet been consumed." She moved closer, her wings spreading in a threat display. "Perhaps I should demonstrate to Seraphine the foolishness of keeping humans in positions of trust." Before Marcus could react, Seraphine was between them, moving with speed that Marcus's eyes couldn't track. Her hand was around Natasha's throat, not squeezing but clearly capable of doing so. When Seraphine spoke, her voice was cold as winter ice. "You will not touch him. He is under my personal protection, sealed by blood covenant. To harm him is to declare war on my entire coven." "Is that truly your intention, Natasha?" The chamber was absolutely silent. Every vampire present had frozen, waiting to see how this would resolve. Marcus realized he was witnessing something dangerous, a challenge to authority that could escalate into violence. Natasha stared at Seraphine for a long moment, then stepped back, forcing Seraphine to release her throat. "No," she said finally. "I have no wish for war. But I do not have to approve of your choices." "No," Seraphine agreed, her voice still cold. "You do not. Your approval is not required. Your respect for our territorial boundaries and our political agreements is required. Marcus is our political decision. Accept it or depart." Natasha departed, her entourage following, and Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Later that night, after the other visitors had left and the core coven was alone with Marcus, Seraphine addressed what had happened. "You handled that well," she said. "You did not rise to her provocation, did not show weakness or excessive fear. But you must understand that not all vampires will accept you. Some see humans as nothing but prey and consider our attempt at coexistence to be weakness or delusion. You will face hostility, and sometimes that hostility may become physical. That is one of the dangers you accepted when you took this position." "I understand," Marcus said. "But I have a question. Would you really have gone to war over me? If she had actually attacked?" Seraphine didn't hesitate. "Yes. Without question. When we accepted you as Threshold Walker, when we sealed the covenant with your blood, we made you ours to protect. To fail to defend you would be to display weakness that would invite other challenges. More than that, it would be a betrayal of the principles we're trying to establish, that humans can be valued as more than food, that coexistence is possible. If we abandoned you when challenged, those principles would be revealed as empty words." Marcus felt the weight of that commitment. These beings, predators, monsters by many definitions, had bound themselves to protect him even at significant cost. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus settled into his new existence. His old life didn't disappear entirely. He maintained his apartment, kept up minimal contact with his few friends, even occasionally worked on his old research projects. But that life felt increasingly distant, like a performance he gave during daylight hours while his real existence happened at night. His relationship with his sister Emma became even more strained. She called one evening while he was preparing to head to the townhouse, and he made the mistake of answering. "Marcus, where the hell have you been?" Emma demanded. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. You're not returning my calls, you barely respond to texts. What's going on?" Marcus struggled for an explanation that wasn't a lie but didn't reveal the truth. I've been busy with a new project. It's consuming a lot of my time and attention. What kind of project? You sound different. Distant. I can't really talk about it, Marcus said, and heard how inadequate that sounded. Can't or won't. Emma's voice carried hurt beneath the anger. You know what, fine. Whatever. Call me when you remember you have family. She hung up before Marcus could respond. He stood holding the phone, feeling the weight of yet another cost of his new life, the growing distance from the few human connections he had. Could he have handled that better? Probably. But what could he say? Sorry sis, I'm just busy being educated by vampires every night? She would think he had lost his mind. Later that night, Marcus mentioned the interaction to Lyanna during a break in training. She listened thoughtfully, then offered perspective. Isolation from your former human connections is inevitable to some degree, she said gently. The secrets you carry, the life you now lead, these things create barriers that are hard to overcome. But you don't have to sever those connections entirely. You simply have to learn to maintain them differently. Call your sister back tomorrow. Apologize for being distant. Make time for her occasionally, even if you can't explain everything about your life. The relationships with your human family and friends will keep you grounded, remind you of who you were before all of this. That's valuable, Marcus. Don't discard it entirely. Marcus took her advice. He called Emma the next day, apologized, made vague but genuine-sounding explanations about his new consulting work that required odd hours and confidentiality. It didn't fully repair the damage, but it helped. He resolved to maintain at least some connection to his human life, even as his vampire life consumed more and more of his time and attention. By the end of 3 months, Marcus had been transformed in ways both obvious and subtle. He moved differently, with the economy of motion that came from combat training. He observed his surroundings with heightened awareness, always noting exits and potential threats. He had accumulated knowledge that would have been the envy of any historian or anthropologist. He had formed genuine relationships with beings who existed outside of human time. And he had begun, in small ways, to actually contribute value to the coven that was investing so much in his education. His insights into modern human society proved useful in ways the vampires hadn't anticipated. His research skills, honed through years of academic training, allowed him to investigate questions and problems that the vampires themselves couldn't easily pursue. His very humanity, his mortal perspective, occasionally offered viewpoints that centuries of immortal existence had caused the vampires to overlook. One night, Seraphine gathered the core coven and several extended members in the townhouse library for a special meeting. When Marcus arrived, he found the vampires arranged with unusual formality, and he sensed immediately that something significant was about to happen. Seraphine stood at the head of the great table, and when everyone was assembled, she spoke with ceremonial gravity. Marcus Holloway came to us 3 months ago as a test subject, a human we hoped might prove capable of serving as Threshold Walker. Tonight I declare that test complete. He has exceeded every expectation, demonstrated every quality we required, and proven his value beyond question. By the authority vested in me as first of this coven, I declare his probationary period ended. From this night forward, Marcus Holloway is recognized as full Threshold Walker of the Coven of the Twilight Veil, with all rights and responsibilities that title entails. The vampires responded in unison, so witnessed, so acknowledged, so sealed. Seraphine moved around the table to stand before Marcus. You have earned this, she said, her voice warm with genuine pride. Welcome truly and fully to your new life. 6 months after his first night in the stone chamber, Marcus Holloway stood once again in that ancient space. But this time he entered not as a frightened test subject but as an acknowledged member of the Coven of the Twilight Veil. The chamber had been prepared for a ceremony, with even more candles than usual creating a warm glow throughout the vast space. Representatives from 7 different covens had gathered, their presence a testament to how significant this ceremony was considered within vampire society. Marcus recognized Lord Victor and several others he had met during his training. Dozens of vampires filled the chamber, their wings creating a spectacular display of dark beauty, their crimson eyes all focused on the ritual about to unfold. Seraphine stood at the center of the chamber, dressed in her most formal attire, a gown of deep crimson with gold embroidery that seemed to capture and hold the candlelight. Her wings were fully spread, creating a magnificent backdrop, and she wore her circlet of dark metal with its pulsing ruby. "We are gathered," Seraphine announced, her voice filling the chamber with that supernatural resonance Marcus had first heard 6 months ago, to formally recognize Marcus Holloway as Threshold Walker of the Coven of the Twilight Veil and to celebrate the completion of his initial training. This is a rare occasion. Threshold Walkers are unusual in our modern age, and ones who successfully complete training are rarer still. We honor not just Marcus but the possibility he represents, that our two species can find common ground, can work together, can exist in genuine partnership rather than simply predator and prey. She gestured for Marcus to approach. He walked forward, aware of every eye tracking his movement, and took his place beside Seraphine at the chamber's center. "Marcus Holloway," Seraphine said formally, "do you swear to serve the Coven of the Twilight Veil faithfully, to guard our secrets, to work for our well-being, and to serve as bridge between our people and yours?" "I do so swear," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his awareness of the profound moment. "Do you swear to uphold the principles of the Covenant, to honor your commitments, and to maintain the integrity that has brought you to this position?" "I do so swear." "Then by the authority vested in me as first of this coven, and witnessed by these representatives of Vampire Society, I declare you fully recognized as Threshold Walker." She produced a medallion on a chain, silver, inscribed with symbols Marcus now recognized as representing the Coven of the Twilight Veil. She placed it around his neck, the metal settling against his chest with surprising warmth. "Welcome," Seraphine said, and then she did something unexpected. She knelt before him, bringing herself to his level in a gesture of respect that shocked him. One by one the other members of her core coven followed suit. 7 vampire women, ancient and powerful, kneeling before a human man. The gesture sent ripples through the assembled vampires. Marcus heard murmurs, saw expressions ranging from approval to shock to outright disapproval. This was not normal protocol, he realized. Seraphine was making a statement, declaring that Threshold Walkers deserved respect not just as servants but as genuine partners. After a long moment, Seraphine rose and the others followed. "Let this image be carried to every coven," she said, addressing the assembled crowd. "Let it be known that the Coven of the Twilight Veil values its Threshold Walker, honors his contribution, and expects others to do the same. Any who harm him harm us." The ceremony transitioned into something more like a reception. Music played, performed by vampire musicians on instruments both ancient and modern. Food was provided for the handful of humans present, Marcus and the human servants of various covens. Vampires circulated, conversing, networking, conducting the social and political business that all civilizations engage in. Marcus found himself at the center of considerable attention. Vampires he had never met approached to introduce themselves, to assess him, to ask questions about his role and his perspectives. It was exhausting but also exhilarating. He was being treated as someone significant, someone whose opinions and insights mattered. Lord Victor approached with a crystal goblet in hand, filled with blood. Marcus noted with the casual acceptance that had replaced his initial revulsion. The ancient vampire's presence still commanded attention, but Marcus no longer felt the overwhelming urge to flee that he had experienced during their first meeting. "A remarkable ceremony," Victor said, his accent rolling over the words like distant thunder. "Seraphine has always been bold, but I did not expect her to kneel before a human, even one as valued as you. She makes a statement that will echo through our society for years to come." "I was surprised as well, my lord," Marcus admitted. "I'm not certain I'm worthy of such respect." Victor's laugh was sharp. "Worthiness is not given, young Threshold Walker. It is earned, demonstrated, proven through action and time. You have begun that process impressively, but the true test lies ahead. Tell me, now that your training is complete, now that you understand what we are and what you have committed to, do you still believe coexistence between our species is possible?" It was the fundamental question Marcus realized. The one that everything else hinged upon. I believe it's necessary, Marcus said carefully. Not just possible but necessary. Your numbers are small and declining. Human technology makes hiding increasingly difficult. The old ways of existing completely separate from human society are becoming unsustainable. You need allies, bridges, humans who can help you navigate a world that grows more complex by the day. And humans, even if most don't know you exist, would benefit from the knowledge and perspective you've accumulated across centuries. So yes, I believe coexistence is possible. But more than that, I believe it's the only viable path forward for both our peoples. Victor studied him with those intense crimson eyes, then nodded slowly. Spoken like a true diplomat. You may yet prove to be Seraphine's greatest acquisition in centuries. He raised his goblet in salute. To coexistence then. May you live long enough to help achieve it. As Victor moved away, Isolde appeared at Marcus's elbow. She looked particularly young tonight, wearing a dress of pale blue that emphasized her apparent adolescence. But her eyes held their usual ancient sadness. Overwhelming, isn't it? She said softly. All these powerful beings, all this attention, all these expectations pressing down on you. Terrifying, Marcus agreed. I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong, all the ways I could fail or disappoint or make a mistake that costs lives. Good, Isolde said, and Marcus looked at her in surprise. She smiled slightly. If you weren't afraid, you wouldn't be taking this seriously enough. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you thoughtful, keeps you from becoming arrogant. The humans who have failed in this role, and there have been many over the centuries, they were the ones who lost their fear, who started to believe they were invulnerable because of their association with us. You won't make that mistake, I think. She linked her arm through his in a gesture that looked sisterly despite the vast gulf in their actual ages. Come. There's someone I want you to meet. Isolde led Marcus to a quieter corner of the chamber, where an elderly vampire sat in one of the throne-like chairs. He appeared to be in his 70s, unusual as most vampires were transformed in their physical prime. His hair was white, his face deeply lined, and he leaned on a carved walking stick. But his eyes glowed with that same crimson light, and Marcus could sense the power emanating from him. This is Elder Thomas, Isolde said with deep respect in her voice. He is the oldest vampire in North America, transformed over 1500 years ago, long before European contact. He rarely leaves his territory in the northern wilderness, but he came tonight specifically to meet you. Marcus bowed, unsure of the proper protocol but defaulting to showing utmost respect. Elder Thomas. It's an honor. The ancient vampire's voice was like wind through autumn leaves, dry, rustling, but carrying clearly. Sit, young human. These old bones tire of looking up at people. Marcus settled onto a nearby chair, and Isolde withdrew to give them privacy while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. I have watched your species for 15 centuries, Elder Thomas said without preamble. I have seen you grow from scattered tribes to a global civilization. I have seen your empires rise and fall, your technologies advance from stone tools to nuclear weapons, your philosophies evolve from shamanism to quantum physics. And I have seen every previous attempt at formal coexistence between our peoples fail. Do you know why they failed, Marcus Holloway? I can guess, Elder, but I'd rather hear your perspective. They failed because both sides wanted the other to change fundamentally. Humans wanted vampires to stop being predators, to give up blood feeding, to become something other than what we are. Vampires wanted humans to accept their position as prey, to serve without question, to abandon their autonomy. Neither side was willing to accept the other as they truly were. The partnerships that formed were built on false premises, and they inevitably collapsed. Elder Thomas leaned forward, his ancient eyes boring into Marcus. Seraphine's approach is different. She does not ask you to become vampire-like, nor does she pretend that her coven will become more human. She acknowledges the fundamental differences and seeks to build partnership despite those differences, not by erasing them. That is why this attempt may actually succeed where others have failed. But it requires you to maintain your humanity, Marcus. You must not become so immersed in our world that you forget what it means to be mortal, to live with human values and human limitations. The moment you try to become one of us in all but blood, you lose your value as a bridge. Do you understand? I do, Elder, Marcus said quietly. I need to remain genuinely human while working among vampires. The tension of that position, belonging to neither world fully but connected to both, that's precisely what makes the role functional. Elder Thomas smiled, and it transformed his ancient face. You understand indeed. Very well. You have my blessing, young Threshold Walker. I will spread word among the covens I maintain contact with that you are worthy of respect and protection. That approval will serve you well in the years to come. The old vampire rose with surprising grace despite his aged appearance and moved away, his walking stick tapping against the stone floor. Isolde returned to Marcus's side. That was significant, she said. Elder Thomas's approval carries weight that even Victor's doesn't. He is so old, so respected, that his word influences covens across the continent. You've just gained protection that extends far beyond Seraphine's territory. As the night progressed, Marcus found himself in conversation after conversation, each one revealing new layers of vampire society. He met scholars who maintained private libraries of texts dating back millennia. He met artists who had painted masterpieces that hung in human museums under false attributions. He met scientists who studied supernatural phenomena using methods that blended ancient mysticism with modern research techniques. One particularly memorable conversation was with a vampire named Dr. Chen, who appeared to be in her 40s and spoke with a slight Chinese accent. She had been transformed in 1890 and had spent her immortal life studying the intersection of vampire physiology and human medicine. I've been working on a project that might interest you, Dr. Chen said, her eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm of a true researcher. Developing medical treatments derived from vampire biology that could be safely used in humans. You know that small amounts of vampire blood can heal injuries and cure diseases. But the administration has to be extremely precise. Too much and you begin the transformation, killing the human. Too little and the effects are negligible. I'm trying to isolate the specific compounds in vampire blood that provide healing properties without the transformative elements. Marcus leaned forward, fascinated. That could revolutionize human medicine. If you could package those healing properties in a form that was safe and consistent. Precisely, Dr. Chen said. But here's the challenge. I need to test these treatments and I need human subjects who understand what they're participating in, who can give genuinely informed consent. The Covenant prohibits us from experimenting on humans who don't fully comprehend the risks. That's where someone like you becomes invaluable. You could help me design studies, recruit suitable volunteers from among humans who already know about vampire society, ensure that the research meets both our ethical standards and human ones. I'd be honored to help, Marcus said. That kind of research, work that benefits both our species, that's exactly the kind of bridge building I hope to do in this role. Dr. Chen smiled. Excellent. I'll contact you through Seraphine's coven in the coming weeks. We have much to discuss. Near midnight, Seraphine called for attention and the chamber quieted. My friends, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, we have celebrated tonight, but celebration must eventually give way to purpose. Marcus Holloway is now fully recognized as Threshold Walker, which means he is ready to begin actual operations rather than simply training. I have his first major assignment prepared. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was it, the transition from student to active participant. Seraphine gestured, and Ravenna came forward carrying a leather portfolio. In 3 weeks, Seraphine explained, there will be a gathering of vampire covens in Montreal, a regional council meeting to discuss territorial disputes, resource allocation and responses to increasing human technological surveillance. 17 covens will be represented. The Coven of the Twilight Veil will attend, and Marcus will accompany us as our Threshold Walker. She looked directly at Marcus. Your role will be multifaceted. You will take notes and records of the proceedings. Vampire memory is excellent, but we've learned that written records prevent later disputes about what was actually said or agreed upon. You will offer perspective on human technologies and social trends that affect the topics being discussed. And you will serve as neutral witness to any agreements or treaties formed, your human presence ensuring that all parties are reminded that their decisions affect the mortal world as well. Ravenna handed Marcus the portfolio. Inside you'll find background materials on each attending coven. Their histories, their current leadership, their political positions and alliances. You have 3 weeks to study these materials until you know them thoroughly. You'll be walking into a room full of powerful vampires with complicated relationships and centuries of history. You cannot afford ignorance. Marcus opened the portfolio to find it filled with documents, photographs, maps and detailed notes. It was easily 100 pages of material. "I understand," he said. "I'll be ready." "I know you will," Seraphine said, and there was genuine confidence in her voice. "This is not the most dangerous assignment you'll ever receive, but it is an important one. How you perform in Montreal will influence how other covens view you and, by extension, how they view the entire concept of threshold walkers. You represent not just yourself and our coven, but the possibility of change in our society." No pressure, Marcus thought wryly. But aloud he simply said, "I won't disappoint you." The ceremony wound down as dawn approached. Vampires began departing, returning to their various territories before daylight made travel impossible. The human servants, including Marcus, were escorted out by James and Robert. As Marcus descended the steps of the ancient building into the pre-dawn darkness, Lyanna caught up with him. "Marcus, wait," she called softly. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of intensive study. Marcus barely slept, consuming every detail in the portfolio Ravenna had provided. He learned the intricate histories of the 17 covens that would attend the Montreal Council. Their territories, their specializations, their alliances and rivalries that stretched back centuries. The Covenant of the Northern Watch controlled territory across Quebec and eastern Ontario, known for their rigid traditionalism and resistance to modern adaptation. The Circle of the Crimson Moon held Montreal itself, wealthy and politically cunning, skilled at manipulating human institutions. The Shadow Collective operated throughout the maritime provinces, mysterious and insular, rarely involving themselves in broader vampire politics unless their interests were directly threatened. Each coven had its own personality, its own agenda, its own complex relationships with the others. Marcus created charts and timelines, memorizing faces from photographs, studying the vampires who would be present until he could recognize them instantly and recall their political positions. Yuki helped him prepare technologically, providing him with specialized equipment. "This recording device," she explained, holding up what looked like an ordinary pen, "will capture audio of the entire proceedings. It's shielded against supernatural detection. Most vampires can hear electronic devices operating, but this one operates on frequencies they can't perceive. You'll take notes publicly with this regular notebook, but you'll have the full audio recording as backup." She also provided him with a modified phone. "This has a panic button," she said, showing him a specific sequence of taps on the screen. "If you're in immediate danger and separated from our coven members, activate this. It sends your exact location to us and to James and Robert, and it triggers protocols we've established with allied covens in the Montreal area. Help will come, though you'll need to survive until it arrives." Marcus the Elder intensified combat training in those final weeks. "You won't be expected to fight in Montreal," he said as they sparred in the reinforced basement, "but you need to be able to protect yourself long enough to escape if something goes wrong. Political gatherings of vampires are usually civilized, but usually is not always. Power struggles can turn violent, and you're the most vulnerable being who'll be in that room." On the night before departure, the core coven gathered at the townhouse for final preparations. Seraphine laid out the political landscape with brutal clarity. The primary dispute that will dominate this council involves territory along the Ottawa River Valley. The Covenant of the Northern Watch claims ancestral rights to that territory dating back 2 centuries. The Circle of the Crimson Moon claims that demographic changes have shifted the territory into their sphere of influence. The human population centers have grown and shifted, making that territory more naturally part of Montreal's greater metropolitan area. Both sides have valid arguments. Both sides are prepared to fight if negotiations fail. Ravenna unrolled a detailed map across the table. The Ottawa River Valley territory is valuable because it includes several small cities with universities. University towns are excellent feeding grounds, large populations of young, healthy humans who frequently go missing or behave erratically without raising alarm. Losing that territory would force either coven to adjust their feeding patterns significantly, which is why both are so invested in maintaining their claim. What's our coven's position? Marcus asked. Officially neutral, Seraphine replied. We don't have territorial interests in that region, so we have no direct stake. But we do have relationships with both covens. The Covenant of the Northern Watch's leader, Lady Marguerite, is an old ally. We fought together during the vampire wars of the 1700s. The Circle of the Crimson Moon's first, Lord Antoine, has provided us with significant financial assistance in recent decades. We're walking a careful line, trying to help negotiate a solution that satisfies both without alienating either. He turned, and she approached with an expression that mixed pride and concern. You did beautifully tonight, she said. You handled yourself with grace under enormous pressure. But I need you to understand something before Montreal. The ceremony tonight was celebratory, respectful, even warm. Montreal will be different. You'll be walking into a room full of vampires who are engaged in political negotiations, territorial disputes, and power struggles. Some will see you as useful. Others will see you as a weakness to exploit, a vulnerable human who can be threatened or harmed to manipulate our coven's position. You'll need to be constantly vigilant. Marcus nodded slowly. I appreciate the warning. Will the whole coven be with me? Seraphine, Ravenna, Kira, and myself, Lyanna confirmed. 4 of us to provide protection and support. But even so, you'll be in danger. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, speak up immediately. I promise, Marcus said. He reached out and squeezed her hand, cold as always but somehow comforting. Thank you, Lyanna. For everything. For being the first to show me compassion in that chamber 6 months ago. For being someone I can talk to honestly. For caring whether I survive this. Lyanna's expression softened, and for a moment Marcus saw past the predator to the woman she had been centuries ago. You've become important to me, Marcus. To all of us really, but I'll speak for myself. You're not just an asset or a tool. You're a friend. Perhaps one of the first genuine friends I've had in decades. So yes, I care whether you survive. Very much. She released his hand and stepped back, her wings folding close. Now go. Rest. Study those materials. And know that we'll be with you in Montreal, no matter what happens. Marcus climbed into the waiting sedan, the portfolio heavy in his lap, Lyanna's words echoing in his mind. The first 6 months had been about learning and preparation. Now the real work was beginning. Kira leaned forward, her warrior's instincts focused on potential threats. The danger point will be if one side or the other tries to force us to choose publicly. If they demand we declare support for their position, we'll be in a difficult situation. Refusing to choose may be seen as weakness. Choosing one side creates an enemy of the other. Your role, Marcus, may be to provide a diplomatic out. As a human observer, you can offer perspectives that allow both sides to save face while compromising. How would that work? Marcus asked, trying to envision the scenario. Ravenna smiled slightly. For instance, if negotiations stall, you might observe that from a human sociological perspective, territory boundaries often work best when they follow natural divisions in human communities rather than arbitrary historical lines. You could suggest commissioning a detailed study of human population patterns, economic flows, social connections. A study that would take several months to complete, giving both sides time to cool down and negotiate privately without the pressure of the full council watching. The key is that the suggestion comes from you, the neutral human, rather than from any vampire faction. I understand, Marcus said, though his stomach tightened at the responsibility. I'm essentially a tool for face-saving and de-escalation. You're a diplomatic asset, Seraphine corrected. One of the most valuable kinds. Never underestimate the importance of giving proud, powerful beings a way to retreat from untenable positions without appearing weak. Lyanna had been quiet through most of the strategic discussion, but now she spoke. Marcus, I need you to understand something else. You'll be the only human in that room who isn't a servant or thrall. Every vampire present will be intensely aware of your heartbeat, your scent, your vulnerability. Some will find it interesting. Some will find it arousing, and I don't mean that in a purely sexual sense, though that may be part of it. I mean arousing in the way that prey arouses a predator. You need to be prepared for vampires to test boundaries, to move into your personal space, to make comments or gestures designed to provoke fear responses. Why would they do that? Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. To test you, Lina said. To see if you break easily. To assess whether you're truly worthy of your position or just a human playing at being important. And for some, simply because they enjoy frightening humans. You'll need to remain calm, composed, professional. Show fear. We know you'll be afraid, there's no shame in that, but don't let fear control you. Don't let it make you freeze or flee or lash out. The next evening they departed for Montreal. Rather than flying commercially, too many security complications for vampires traveling with unusual equipment, they traveled in a specialized vehicle that Kira drove. The van's windows were heavily tinted, nearly opaque, protecting the vampires from any possibility of sunlight exposure. The interior was luxuriously appointed, with comfortable seating and climate control to maintain the cool temperatures vampires preferred. The drive took several hours, darkness deepening as they traveled north. Marcus used the time to review his materials one final time, though by now he had essentially memorized everything. Seraphine spent much of the drive in what appeared to be meditation, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and measured. Ravenna worked on a laptop, reviewing documents and correspondence. Kira focused entirely on driving, her warrior's alertness never wavering. Lina sat beside Marcus, occasionally answering his last-minute questions. "What's the physical layout of the council chamber?" Marcus asked. "Where will I be positioned?" "The Circle of the Crimson Moon is hosting, so the meeting will be in their primary gathering hall, a converted warehouse in Old Montreal that they've owned for over a century. The space is large, with a central table area where the coven leaders sit. Each coven's additional representatives stand or sit in designated areas behind their leaders. You'll be positioned behind and to the side of Seraphine, close enough to hear everything and provide input if needed, but not so prominent as to draw excessive attention." "Will there be other humans there?" "Several. Most covens will bring at least one human servant to handle logistics that can't be managed after dark, accepting deliveries, making phone calls during business hours, that sort of thing. But you'll be the only human who sits at the table's periphery rather than waiting in the outer rooms. That distinction will be noted by everyone present." They arrived in Montreal near midnight, the city's nightlife in full swing around them. Kira navigated through old streets until they reached a warehouse district where old industrial buildings were slowly being converted to lofts and galleries. She pulled into a parking area behind a particularly large brick warehouse, where several other vehicles were already parked. "We're among the last to arrive," Ravenna observed. "Fashionably late as planned. Making an entrance." They exited the van, and Marcus immediately sensed the supernatural presence saturating the area. It was like a pressure in the air, a weight that made his instincts scream danger even though nothing overtly threatening was visible. Multiple covens of vampires, all in close proximity. His primitive human brain recognized the threat even if he couldn't consciously perceive the details. Kira noticed his tension and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Breathe," she said quietly. "What you're feeling is normal. Every human who enters a gathering like this experiences it. The trick is to acknowledge the fear but not let it paralyze you." They approached a reinforced door where two massive vampire guards stood watch. Marcus recognized them from his studies, members of the Circle of the Crimson Moon, chosen for their intimidating physical presence. Both were over 6.5 feet tall, heavily muscled, with wings that had to span 20 feet when fully extended. "Coven of the Twilight Veil," Seraphine announced formally. Seraphine first. Ravenna, historian. Kira, protector. Lina, diplomat. And Marcus Holloway, threshold walker. One of the guards consulted a tablet. The juxtaposition of ancient supernatural beings using modern technology still sometimes surprised Marcus. Expected. You may enter. The threshold walker is noted. Please be informed that Lord Antoine requests all humans remain in designated areas unless specifically called upon. Marcus is not a servant, Seraphine said, her voice carrying an edge. He is my threshold walker and he sits with my coven. This was communicated in advance. The guard inclined his head. Noted and accepted, First Seraphine. Please proceed. The door opened and they entered. The interior of the warehouse had been completely transformed. The cavernous space soared upward into darkness, the ceiling lost in shadows. But the main floor had been arranged as an elegant council chamber. A massive circular table dominated the center, clearly custom-built, carved from dark wood that appeared ancient, its surface inlaid with symbols Marcus recognized from his studies as representing different vampire covens across North America. Around this table, 16 covens had already assembled, their first seated at the table itself, their additional representatives arranged behind them in carefully organized groups. The sheer number of vampires present was overwhelming, perhaps 70 or 80 supernatural beings, all radiating that predatory presence Marcus had learned to recognize. And every single one of them turned to look as Seraphine's coven entered. The scrutiny was intense, physical in its weight. Marcus felt dozens of crimson eyes fixing on him specifically, assessing, calculating, judging. He forced himself to walk steadily, to keep his breathing measured, to maintain the calm professional demeanor he had practiced. Seraphine led them to their designated position at the table. Lord Antoine, first of the Circle of the Crimson Moon and their host, rose to greet them. He was elegant in a way that reminded Marcus of old French aristocracy, refined features, dark hair worn long, clothing that managed to be both modern and somehow timeless. His wings were a deep burgundy, and he moved with practiced grace. First Seraphine, Antoine said, his French accent musical. Welcome. It has been too long since we gathered in person. His eyes shifted to Marcus, and his expression became carefully neutral. And this must be your famous threshold walker. Marcus Holloway, yes? We have heard much about you. Lord Antoine, Marcus said, bowing slightly in the gesture of respect Stefan had taught him. Thank you for hosting this gathering and for accommodating my presence. Accommodating, Antoine repeated, seeming to taste the word. An interesting choice. Yes, well. We shall see how the evening progresses. He gestured to the seating arrangement. Please take your positions. We begin shortly. Seraphine took her seat at the great table, with Ravenna standing immediately behind her right shoulder. Kira positioned herself behind and to the left, where she could watch both the table and the broader room. Lina moved to Seraphine's left side. And Marcus was directed to a chair slightly back from the table, close enough to hear clearly, far enough to indicate his subordinate status. As he settled into position, Marcus became aware of the vampire sitting at the next position around the circular table, Lady Marguerite of the Covenant of the Northern Watch. She appeared to be in her 60s at transformation, unusual for a vampire, with iron-gray hair and sharp features. Her wings were a steel gray that matched her hair, and her eyes held a coldness that made even Morgana seem warm by comparison. Lady Marguerite studied Marcus with unconcealed disdain. A human, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the acoustic space. Sitting at council. How very progressive of you, Seraphine. The world changes, Marguerite, Seraphine replied evenly. Those who refuse to adapt will find themselves obsolete. Or perhaps, Marguerite countered, those who abandon tradition too eagerly will find they have sacrificed strength for the illusion of progress. It was a clear challenge, and the chamber fell silent as other covens watched to see how Seraphine would respond. This was it, Marcus realized, the first test of the evening, and it directly involved him. Before Seraphine could reply, Marcus spoke. His voice was quiet but carried clearly in the tense silence. Lady Marguerite, if I may? Every eye turned to him. He felt the weight of that attention like physical pressure, but he pushed forward. I understand your concern. Tradition exists for reasons. It preserves what works, protects against reckless change. I respect that deeply. I'm here not to replace tradition but to complement it. The modern world poses challenges our ancestors never faced: digital surveillance, global communication networks, scientific analysis of phenomena that was once safely mysterious. My role is to help navigate those challenges, to serve as a bridge between the ancient wisdom your traditions preserve and the contemporary realities we must all address. I'm not here to diminish anyone's strength. I'm here to add a capability that didn't exist before. The silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, Elder Thomas's dry voice came from across the chamber. Marcus hadn't realized the ancient vampire was present, but there he was, seated in a position of honor near the table's head. "Well-spoken, young Walker," Elder Thomas said. "The boy understands what many of us forget, that adding new tools does not require discarding the old ones. Both can coexist. Lady Marguerite, I suggest we allow the evening's business to demonstrate whether First Seraphine's innovation proves valuable or not. Judge the Threshold Walker by his contribution, not by his species." Lady Marguerite inclined her head to Elder Thomas. One did not argue with a vampire of his age and status, but her expression remained skeptical. "Very well. Let us proceed with the council's business." Lord Antoine rose again, calling the assembly to order. "Representatives of 17 covens, we gather tonight to address matters of territory, resource allocation, and collective security. The agenda has been distributed. We begin with the primary dispute, the Ottawa River Valley territory claimed by both the Covenant of the Northern Watch and the Circle of the Crimson Moon." And so the council began in earnest. The territorial dispute unfolded exactly as Seraphine had predicted: passionate, complex, and dangerously close to violence. Lady Marguerite presented the Covenant of the Northern Watch's position with icy precision, laying out historical claims dating back to the 1790s, when her coven had first established dominance in that region. "We were there before Montreal was more than a colonial outpost," Marguerite declared, her voice ringing through the chamber. "We established the protocols, managed the feeding grounds, maintained the careful balance that prevented human suspicion. The territory is ours by right of first settlement, by 2 centuries of stewardship, by the blood of coven members who died defending it from rival claims." Lord Antoine countered with equal passion. "The world of the 1790s no longer exists. The Ottawa River Valley territory has transformed fundamentally. Human population has grown 20-fold. The cities have expanded and connected, becoming part of Montreal's greater metropolitan region economically, socially, and infrastructurally. To pretend otherwise is to deny reality. Territory should be allocated based on current conditions, not ancient history. The Circle of the Crimson Moon can manage that territory more effectively because we already manage the urban systems it's now integrated with." Back and forth they argued, each side marshalling historical precedents, demographic data, political alliances. Other covens began taking sides, the chamber dividing into factions. Marcus watched carefully, taking detailed notes in his notebook while the pen camera recorded everything. He noticed patterns the vampires themselves might be missing. The territorial dispute wasn't really about feeding grounds. Both covens had sufficient territory for sustenance. It was about prestige, about pride, about not appearing weak before the other covens assembled. Neither Marguerite nor Antoine could back down without losing face, and that dynamic was pushing them toward confrontation neither actually wanted. As the debate grew more heated, Marcus saw Seraphine glance back at him, a subtle signal. This was the moment they had discussed. He cleared his throat and Seraphine raised her hand. "If I may," Seraphine said, her voice cutting through the increasingly hostile exchange. "My Threshold Walker has been studying this dispute from a human sociological perspective. Marcus, would you share your observations?" Every eye in the chamber turned to Marcus. He felt his heart hammering but forced his voice to remain steady as he stood. "Thank you, First Seraphine. Lord Antoine, Lady Marguerite, honored representatives, I've been listening carefully to both positions, and I believe you're both correct." Confused murmurs rippled through the assembly. Marguerite's expression hardened. "That's a nonsensical statement, human. We present contradictory claims. We cannot both be correct. With respect, Lady Marguerite, You can both be correct about different aspects of the situation. You're correct that historical rights matter, that centuries of stewardship create legitimate claims. Lord Antoine is correct that contemporary realities matter, that demographic and infrastructural changes alter territorial dynamics. The challenge is that you're trying to resolve a complex situation with a binary outcome. One coven gains the territory, the other loses it completely. But human territorial disputes have developed more nuanced solutions. Marcus pulled out his tablet, Yuki's modified device that wouldn't trigger vampire senses, and displayed a map of the disputed region. What if, instead of single coven control, you established a joint administration? The territory could be divided not by coven but by function and time. For instance, he manipulated the map, highlighting different areas in different colors. The older, more traditional communities along the northern border remain under the covenant of the Northern Watch's primary administration. The newer suburban developments that have grown toward Montreal become primarily the Circle of the Crimson Moon's responsibility. The university towns in between, the most valuable feeding grounds, operate under joint administration, with both covens coordinating their activities and sharing the resources. Antoine leaned forward, interested despite himself. Joint administration. That's highly unusual. It's also precedent, Ravenna interjected smoothly, supporting Marcus's suggestion. The Vienna Accords of 1842 established joint administration between three covens over disputed Alpine territory. That arrangement lasted nearly a century and is still considered one of the most successful territorial compromises in vampire history. The Vienna Accords involved smaller territories and less valuable resources, Marguerite objected, but Marcus heard the uncertainty in her voice. She was considering it. Marcus pressed his advantage carefully. The beauty of joint administration is that both covens can claim victory. Lady Marguerite, you maintain your historical claim. Your coven's authority over the territory is formally recognized, not eliminated. Lord Antoine, you gain management authority over the regions that have become functionally part of Montreal's sphere. Neither coven appears weak. Both gain something tangible. And the dispute is resolved without the costly conflict that would inevitably damage both covens regardless of who eventually won. A new voice entered the discussion, a vampire Marcus hadn't heard speak before, representing one of the neutral covens. The Threshold Walker makes a compelling argument. Joint administration would also provide the rest of us with assurance that this dispute won't escalate into open conflict that disrupts the broader regional stability we all depend upon. Others began voicing support. The tide was turning, Marcus could feel it. Antoine and Marguerite exchanged glances across the table, and Marcus saw something pass between them. A recognition that they had been given an exit from their confrontation, a way to step back without losing face. I would need to review the specific terms, Marguerite said carefully. The division of functions would require detailed negotiation. As would the revenue sharing from the university feeding grounds, Antoine added. But the basic concept has merit. I'm willing to explore it further. Seraphine smiled slightly. Perhaps this is a matter that could be delegated to a working committee, representatives from both covens, plus neutral observers to ensure fairness. They could draft a detailed proposal for the next council gathering. Elder Thomas's dry voice carried approval. Wise suggestion, First Seraphine. Let us move forward with that approach. Lady Marguerite, Lord Antoine, do you consent to this process? Both vampire leaders agreed, and Marcus felt the tension in the chamber ease dramatically. A dispute that could have led to violence had been defused, redirected into bureaucratic channels that would eventually produce a compromise both sides could accept. As Marcus took his seat again, he caught Lyanna's eye. She was smiling with genuine warmth, pride evident in her expression. Kira gave him an almost imperceptible nod of approval. Even Ravenna looked pleased. But not everyone was happy. Marcus noticed a vampire across the chamber watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between interest and calculation. She was striking even among vampires, with hair like spun gold and wings of pure white, unusual in their coloring. She wore a dress that seemed woven from moonlight, and her crimson eyes held an intensity that made Marcus deeply uncomfortable. Lina noticed his attention and leaned close to whisper. That's Celestine, first of the Silver Court. Her coven operates in the far north, Hudson Bay territory. She's unpredictable, powerful, ancient, and known for unconventional approaches to vampire society. The fact that she's watching you so intently is either very good or very bad. I can't tell which yet. The council moved on to other business. Discussions of feeding protocols in an age of increased surveillance, strategies for dealing with human organizations that hunted supernatural beings, resource sharing for covens facing economic difficulties in their territories. Marcus continued taking notes, occasionally offering observations when asked, but mostly watching and learning. He was fascinated by the complexity of vampire governance. It wasn't the simple hierarchy he had initially imagined. There were formal rules and ancient traditions, yes, but there was also constant negotiation, coalition building, persuasion. The vampire leaders at this table were sophisticated political operators, each managing networks of alliances and rivalries that would have impressed any human diplomat. During a break in the proceedings, even vampires needed occasional pauses for less formal discussion. Lord Antoine approached Seraphine's delegation. Marcus stood as protocol demanded, and Antoine gave him an appraising look. That was impressive, Mr. Holloway, Antoine said. I'll confess I was skeptical about having a human involved in council proceedings. But you've provided value I did not anticipate. The joint administration solution allows me to gain actual control over the territory I care most about while giving Marguerite enough to preserve her dignity. That's a better outcome than I could have achieved through continued confrontation. Thank you, Lord Antoine, Marcus replied. I'm glad I could help facilitate a solution. More than help, Antoine said. You created the solution. That distinction matters. He paused, then continued more quietly. I should tell you that not everyone here is as pleased as I am. There are those who see your success tonight as threatening, proof that humans might have roles beyond service or sustenance. Some vampires are deeply invested in maintaining traditional hierarchies. Watch yourself, Mr. Holloway. Success creates both allies and enemies. With that warning, Antoine moved away to speak with other coven leaders. Marcus exchanged glances with Kira, who had clearly heard the conversation with her supernatural senses. He's right, Kira murmured. You just made yourself politically relevant. That's simultaneously the best and worst thing that could have happened tonight. The council reconvened for its final session, dealing with more technical matters. Updates on human technological developments that affected vampire society, reports from covens about unusual supernatural activity in their territories, coordination of feeding schedules to prevent patterns that might alert human authorities. It was during this final session that Celestine, the white-winged vampire from the far north, requested to speak. Lord Antoine, as host, recognized her. I have a question, Celestine said, her voice carrying an unusual accent Marcus couldn't place. Something ancient, predating modern linguistic categories. Not about the agenda items, but about the precedent we've established tonight. We've allowed a human to not only observe but actively participate in vampire governance. We've taken his advice on matters that will shape our society. I propose we discuss whether this is wise. The chamber went silent. This was the challenge Antoine had warned about. Seraphine rose smoothly. Celestine raises a fair question. What guidance would the council like to provide about the role of threshold walkers in our governance? I'll be direct, Celestine said, and now she looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Holloway, you are mortal. You will live, another 40 or 50 years if you're fortunate. Perhaps less, given the dangers of your position. We vampires think in terms of centuries, millennia. Why should we grant significant influence to a being who will be dust before our current strategies have even matured? It was a brutal question, cutting to the fundamental tension of Marcus's position. He stood, knowing that how he responded would define his future role. Lady Celestine, you're absolutely correct that I'm mortal. I'll be dead long before most of you notice the passage of time. But that's precisely why my perspective has value. I think in human terms, in decades rather than centuries. And the world we're living in now changes on human timescales, not vampire ones. Technology evolves every few years. Social movements rise and fall within a generation. Political systems transform within decades. If vampire society only thinks in terms of centuries, you'll always be reacting to changes long after they've already reshaped the world. He gained confidence as he spoke, articulating thoughts he had been forming for months. You need someone who lives on human timescales, who understands the rapid pace of contemporary change, who can help you adapt quickly enough to survive in a world that evolves faster than it ever has before. Yes, I'll die. But hopefully I'll have trained successors by then, established protocols and practices that outlive me. The position of Threshold Walker doesn't die with me, it becomes an institution that serves vampire society across generations. Celestine tilted her head, studying him like a particularly interesting specimen. An eloquent answer. But it raises another question. What happens when a Threshold Walker's advice leads to disaster? When human short-term thinking causes vampires to make decisions that prove catastrophic over longer time frames? Who bears responsibility? Ravenna stepped forward. The same entity that always bears responsibility for our decisions? We do. The Threshold Walker provides advice and perspective. Vampire leadership makes the actual decisions. If those decisions prove flawed, we cannot blame the advisor. This is basic governance principle. Unless, Celestine countered, the advisor has been manipulated or compromised. Humans are vulnerable to coercion in ways we are not. What prevents a human government, a religious organization, or a hostile supernatural entity from capturing a Threshold Walker and using them to feed false information to vampire society? Kira spoke for the first time since the council began, her warrior's voice carrying authority. That's precisely why Threshold Walkers are protected so extensively. Any attack on one is treated as an attack on their entire coven. The consequences for attempting such manipulation would be severe enough to deter most threats. And Threshold Walkers are trained to resist interrogation and coercion. Mr. Holloway has spent months learning techniques that would allow him to die rather than betray us if capture seemed inevitable. It was true. Marcus the Elder had taught him techniques for causing his own death quickly if he was captured and couldn't escape. Methods that didn't require weapons or tools, just knowledge of human physiology and the will to use it. Marcus had hoped he would never need that training, but he understood its necessity. The debate continued for another hour, with various covens weighing in. Some supported the Threshold Walker concept enthusiastically, seeing it as necessary innovation. Others opposed it as dangerous deviation from tradition. The majority fell somewhere in between, willing to allow it on an experimental basis while maintaining skepticism. Finally, Elder Thomas raised his hand, and the chamber fell silent out of respect for his age and authority. "We have debated sufficiently," the ancient vampire said. "Here is what I propose. We formally recognize the position of Threshold Walker as a legitimate role within vampire society, available to any coven that chooses to employ one. However, we establish that Threshold Walkers serve individual covens, not vampire society as a whole. They are advisors with limited authority, not decision-makers. Their advice can be considered, accepted, or rejected as vampire leadership sees fit. And we review this arrangement in 1 year's time, assessing whether the experiment has proven valuable or problematic. Can we agree on this framework?" It was a masterful compromise, Marcus realized. Giving formal recognition to his position while carefully limiting its scope and maintaining safeguards. After brief consultation, the coven leaders indicated agreement. "Then it is settled," Elder Thomas declared. "The position of Threshold Walker is formally recognized, with the limitations described. Mr. Holloway, you are the first to bear this title officially. Use it wisely." Marcus bowed deeply to Elder Thomas and then to the broader assembly. "I am honored by the council's trust. I will serve faithfully and carefully, always remembering that I am an advisor, not a master." As the council adjourned, vampires began departing in their coven groups. Several stopped to speak with Marcus, some offering congratulations, others veiled warnings, a few simply assessing him with unreadable expressions. Celestine approached last, moving with a grace that seemed to defy physics. Up close, Marcus could see that her white wings had the faintest iridescent shimmer, like mother of pearl. Her crimson eyes held depths that suggested enormous age, though her face appeared eternally youthful. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her ancient accent making his name sound exotic. "I challenged you tonight not out of hostility but to test you. You passed admirably. I would like to extend an invitation. Visit my territory in the north. The Silver Court operates very differently from Southern covens. We maintain practices and knowledge that others have forgotten. I believe you would find it educational. And I believe I could use someone with your particular skills." It was an honor, Marcus realized, and also potentially dangerous. But he sensed genuine interest rather than threat in Celestine's offer. "I would be honored, Lady Celestine," Marcus said carefully. "With First Seraphine's permission, of course. I serve her coven specifically." Celestine smiled, and it was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Of course. Seraphine, would you lend me your threshold walker for a visit? A week, perhaps, in the spring when northern travel is feasible." Seraphine considered, then nodded. "If Marcus agrees, and if the timing doesn't conflict with other obligations, I have no objection. Celestine, I trust you to return him intact." "Intact," Celestine repeated, seeming amused by the word. "I promise he will return no more damaged than he arrives." With that cryptic assurance, Celestine departed in a swirl of moonlight fabric and white wings. As Seraphine's coven finally left the warehouse, moving into the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus felt exhausted but exhilarated. His first major operation as Threshold Walker had succeeded beyond his hopes. He had contributed meaningfully to resolving a dangerous dispute. He had survived political challenges. He had gained formal recognition for his position from the broader vampire society. In the van during the drive back, Seraphine was ebullient. "You were perfect, Marcus. Absolutely perfect. The joint administration solution, the way you handled Celestine's challenge, your understanding of when to speak and when to remain silent, all of it was exactly what we needed." "You've made history tonight," Ravenna added. "The first formally recognized Threshold Walker in vampire society. That distinction will carry forward through our chronicles." But it was Lionel's quiet comment that meant the most to Marcus. She leaned close as they traveled through the darkness and whispered, "You didn't just perform your role well tonight. You showed them that coexistence is possible. That humans and vampires can work together as genuine partners. That's the real victory, not the territorial dispute but the proof of concept. You've given hope to those of us who believe our species don't have to remain eternally divided into predator and prey." Marcus felt the weight of that assessment. He had become a symbol, not just an individual. His success or failure would influence how vampire society thought about humans for generations to come. As dawn approached and they arrived back in their home city, Marcus understood that his life had transformed again. He was no longer just a threshold walker for a single coven. He was the threshold walker, the first of what might become many, or the only one if he failed to live up to the responsibility. He thought about Celestine's invitation, about the mysteries the ancient vampire had hinted at. He thought about the rivalries he had created by succeeding tonight, the vampires who would see him as a threat to traditional order. He thought about everything still to learn, all the challenges ahead. But mostly, as James drove him home through the dawn-lit streets, Marcus thought about meaning. About how his life had acquired the significance he had always craved. About how he stood at the edge of eternity, bridging two worlds, mattering in ways that would outlast his mortal years. 6 months after the Montreal Assembly, Marcus Holloway sat in his apartment on a rare evening off, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and crimson. His phone, the encrypted one Yuki had provided, rested on the table beside him, silent for the moment. The medallion Seraphine had placed around his neck during his recognition ceremony hung against his chest. Isolde's ring glowed softly on his finger. His apartment looked different now than it had a year ago. The research papers and academic journals had been supplemented by ancient texts in languages he was learning to read: Latin, ancient Greek, a smattering of Sanskrit. Vampire historical documents lay carefully organized on his desk. A new bookshelf held volumes on supernatural politics, vampire physiology, diplomatic protocols for beings that existed outside human law. But he had also maintained connections to his human life. Photographs of his sister Emma sat prominently displayed. He had reconciled with her to a degree, though she still didn't understand the intensity of his consulting work. A few close friends remained in contact, though he saw them less frequently than he once had. His phone buzzed, the vampire one. A message from Lyanna. Are you prepared for tonight? Celestine's representative arrives at 9 o'clock to discuss details of your northern visit. Seraphine wants you there for the conversation. Marcus typed back, I'll be there. Have you learned anything more about what Celestine actually wants? Only rumors. The Silver Court is secretive. But Elder Thomas vouches for Celestine's integrity, and that's good enough for me. Whatever she wants to show you, it will be significant. Marcus set the phone down and thought about everything that had transpired since that first terrifying night in the stone chamber. He had evolved from a frightened test subject to a formally recognized bridge between species. He had contributed to resolving territorial disputes, advised on adaptation to human technological advancement, begun working with Dr. Chin on medical research that could benefit both vampires and humans. He had earned respect from beings who existed outside human time, who had witnessed civilizations rise and fall. But he had also paid costs. The distance from his human life, the secrets that isolated him from ordinary relationships, the constant low-level fear that came with working among predators, the knowledge that any night could bring danger he wasn't equipped to survive. The growing awareness that his choices were narrowing. The deeper he went into vampire society, the harder it became to imagine returning to a purely human existence. He thought about what Isolde had told him during his first weeks of training. That meaning wasn't something you were given but something you created. He had created meaning from the brief, finite span of his human life. He had built bridges between worlds. He had proven that coexistence was possible. And yet, there were moments, usually in daylight, when the vampires slept and Marcus moved through the human world, when he wondered what he had given up. A normal career, a normal relationship, the possibility of a family, the simple peace of living without secrets that could never be shared. He had traded those possibilities for significance, for impact, for a place in history that would outlast his bones. Was it worth it? Marcus looked at the sunset painting the sky and thought about Lyanna's words on the night they first fed in his presence. That beating, that rhythm, that insistence of life, that is meaning. The fact that you fear meaninglessness proves that you are capable of recognizing meaning when you find it. Yes, he thought. It was worth it. His human phone rang, the ordinary one, the one connected to his old life. He saw the caller ID, Emma. Hey sis, he answered, forcing warmth into his voice despite his fatigue. Marcus, hi. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner this week? I know you're always busy with your mysterious work, but it's been too long. I miss you. Marcus felt the pull of both worlds, the vampire society that needed him tonight, and his sister who needed him in a different way. But one of Lyanna's pieces of advice echoed in his mind. Maintain those human connections, let them keep you grounded. Dinner sounds perfect, Marcus said. When are you free? They made plans, talking about inconsequential things, her work, a mutual friend's wedding, a book she thought he would like. Ordinary human conversation about an ordinary human life. For those few minutes, Marcus was just a man talking to his sister, not a threshold walker navigating supernatural politics. When they hung up, Marcus felt more balanced than he had in weeks. He could inhabit both worlds. He could be bridge and human simultaneously. That was, after all, the entire point of his position. As the sun finished setting and darkness claimed the city, Marcus prepared for the evening ahead. He dressed in the professional but comfortable clothing that had become his uniform. He gathered his materials, notebook, modified pen, camera, tablet, the portfolio Ravenna had prepared about Celestine's Silver Court. He checked his emergency equipment, the phone with its panic button, the small defensive weapons Marcus the Elder had taught him to use, the capsule hidden in his watch that would end his life if capture seemed inevitable. The tools of his trade. The equipment of someone who walked between worlds, who served as bridge and translator and witness to things most humans would never believe existed. James arrived precisely on time as always. In the car, Marcus reviewed the materials one more time. The Silver Court was one of the most mysterious covens in North America, operating in the far north, maintaining traditions and practices that most modern covens had abandoned, rumored to possess knowledge dating back millennia before European contact with the Americas. What did Celestine want to show him? What knowledge could possibly require inviting a human to her remote northern territory? He would find out soon enough. The sedan pulled up to the townhouse, and Marcus saw that it was fully illuminated tonight, every window glowing, indicating a significant gathering. He climbed the steps and entered to find not just Seraphine's core coven, but several guests he hadn't expected. Celestine herself was present, her white wings glowing in the light like captured moonbeams. Beside her stood a vampire Marcus didn't recognize, male, appearing to be of indigenous North American heritage, with wings the color of storm clouds and eyes that held depths suggesting enormous age. "Marcus," Seraphine greeted him warmly. "Come meet Celestine's companion. This is Running on the Wind, one of the eldest vampires in North America. He was transformed long before European contact, and he serves as Celestine's historian and advisor." Marcus bowed respectfully to the ancient vampire. "Honored to meet you, Elder." Running on the Wind studied Marcus with an intensity that was simultaneously uncomfortable and fascinating. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of uncountable years. "So you are the human who would bridge worlds. The one who negotiates where others would fight. The one who asks questions where others accept assumptions." "I try to be, Elder," Marcus said. "Good," Running on the Wind said. "Because what Celestine wishes to show you requires someone who questions. Someone who seeks to understand rather than simply to survive. The Silver Court guards knowledge that predates your civilization's written history. Knowledge of this continent before European contact, of vampire societies that existed and disappeared, of powers and forces that modern covens have forgotten. We share this knowledge carefully, only with those who demonstrate the wisdom to use it properly." Celestine moved forward, her moonlight dress seeming to shimmer with its own illumination. "Marcus Holloway, I watched you carefully in Montreal. I challenged you not to embarrass you, but to test whether you possess the qualities we need. You demonstrated diplomatic skill, yes. But more importantly, you demonstrated humility. You acknowledged your mortality, your limitations, your role as advisor rather than master. That humility is rare and precious." She paused, then continued with an intensity that made the chamber feel suddenly smaller. "The world is changing faster than it ever has before. Forces are stirring that vampire society is largely unaware of. Technological forces, yes, but also supernatural ones. Ancient powers are waking. Old boundaries are weakening. And vampire society risks being caught unprepared because we think in terms of centuries while the world transforms in years. That's why you need threshold walkers," Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Not just to navigate human technology, but to help vampire society adapt quickly enough to survive whatever's coming." "Precisely," Celestine said. "The Silver Court has been monitoring these changes from our northern isolation. We see patterns that covens entangled in human civilization miss. And we believe that the future will require unprecedented cooperation between vampires and humans, not just individual threshold walkers serving individual covens, but something larger. Something that has never been attempted in our long history." She gestured to the assembled vampires, Seraphine's coven, Running on the Wind, several others Marcus now noticed standing in the shadows of the chamber. "We are proposing something revolutionary. A coalition of covens working together with trained threshold walkers to prepare for the changes ahead. A council that spans territories, that thinks both in vampire centuries and human decades, that draws on both our ancient knowledge and your species' contemporary innovations." But he would carry it anyway. Because someone had to. Because the alternative, allowing vampire and human societies to drift apart until confrontation became inevitable, was unacceptable. Because he stood at eternity's edge, and the view from there showed him both the terrible danger and the extraordinary possibility of what they might achieve together. As the night finally ended and dawn approached, Marcus found himself alone with Lyanna for a moment on the townhouse steps. She looked at him with those ancient crimson eyes that had been the first to show him compassion in the stone chamber a year ago. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "This has to be overwhelming." "I'm scared," Marcus admitted, and excited, and completely unsure whether I'm capable of what they're asking. "But I'm also more certain than ever that this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I was looking for my entire life, even before I knew you existed. Purpose. Meaning. The chance to matter." Lyanna reached out and took his hand, cold as always but familiar now, comforting in its own way. "You do matter, Marcus. More than you know. You've given us hope. Genuine hope that coexistence is possible, that we don't have to remain forever separate from the humans we live among. Whatever happens in the spring, whatever challenges lie ahead, you've already succeeded in the most important way. You've proven that bridges can be built. Everything else flows from that." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you, Lyanna. For believing in me from the beginning. For being my friend in a world where I have very few." "Always," Lyanna said. "Whatever comes, whatever you face, you won't face it alone. That's what Coven means, Marcus. You're one of ours now. We protect our own." As James drove Marcus home through the dawn-lit streets, Marcus thought about all the nights ahead, the training and challenges, the journeys to distant territories, the negotiations and discoveries and dangers that waited in his future. He thought about Celestine's mysterious knowledge in the north. He thought about the coalition they were proposing to build, the revolutionary changes they were suggesting for vampire society. But mostly Marcus thought about the human man who had walked into a stone chamber full of vampire women just 1 year ago. Frightened, uncertain, driven by questions he couldn't articulate and a hunger for meaning he didn't fully understand. That man had been transformed, not into a vampire but into something unique. A bridge between worlds, a translator between species, a living symbol of the possibility that predator and prey might find another way to exist. He was still mortal. He would still die, long before most of the vampires he worked with even noticed the passage of time. But his brief life would matter. It would echo through their society for generations. It would shape the future in ways that outlasted his fragile flesh. And in the end, that was all he had ever wanted. As the sun rose fully over the city and Marcus finally slept, he dreamed of standing at the edge of a vast darkness, with lights beginning to appear in the depths. Bridges forming between worlds that had been separate since time immemorial. And himself, small, mortal, finite, standing at the center of it all, helping to build the connections that might save them all. At eternity's edge, between heartbeats and centuries, Marcus Holloway had found his place. And this, he knew with absolute certainty, was only the beginning. Marcus felt the weight of what was being proposed. This wasn't just about his role anymore. This was about transforming vampire society's relationship with humanity in fundamental ways. "That's an enormous undertaking," Marcus said carefully. "It would require covens that have been rivals for centuries to work together. It would require convincing more humans to serve as threshold walkers, training them, protecting them. It would require vampire society to fundamentally reimagine its place in the modern world." "Yes," Seraphine said, and her smile was proud and fierce. "It would require all of that and more. And it begins with you, Marcus. Your success in Montreal proved the concept. Now we need to expand it, carefully, gradually but decisively. We need more humans like you. We need protocols and training programs and political structures to support them. We need to convince skeptical covens that this isn't weakness but wisdom." Running on the Wind stepped forward. "In the spring you will come north to the Silver Court. We will show you knowledge we have never shared with humans before. History, lore, warnings about what approaches. You will learn things that will frighten you and amaze you in equal measure. And then you will help us decide how to share that knowledge with the broader world, both vampire and human." "Why me?" Marcus asked. "I'm just one person. I've been doing this for less than a year. Surely there are more qualified." "There are none more qualified," Celestine interrupted. "Because qualification for this role isn't measured in years of experience or accumulated knowledge. It's measured in character, in the ability to bridge worlds, in the rare combination of courage and humility that you've demonstrated. You are the first formally recognized threshold walker. You will also be the first to see what we guard in the north. And what you learn there will shape how we move forward." The chamber was silent for a moment. Marcus felt the weight of their expectations, the significance of what was being asked. He thought about all he had learned in the past year, all he had sacrificed and gained. He thought about his fear of meaninglessness, and how thoroughly that fear had been answered. "I'm honored by your trust," Marcus said finally. "And I'm terrified by the responsibility. But yes, I'll come north in the spring. I'll learn what you want to teach me. And I'll do everything I can to help build the bridges you're proposing." Celestine's smile was radiant and ancient. "Then we have hope. Genuine hope that our species can navigate the changes ahead, together rather than separately." The gathering continued for hours, discussing logistics and strategies and timelines. But Marcus's mind kept returning to a single thought. He had wanted his life to matter, to have meaning that outlasted his brief time in the world. Now he was being asked to help shape the future of two entire species, to stand at the threshold between worlds and help determine whether they would collide or cooperate. It was more meaning than he had ever dared hope for. And it was, simultaneously, more burden than any single human should have to carry. Marcus Holloway's journey from frightened test subject to formally recognized threshold walker represents the universal human desire to matter, to understand, to transcend our limitations, not by becoming immortal but by creating meaning that outlasts our brief time in the world. The vampire women he encounters, Seraphine, Lyanna, Ravenna, Morgana, Kira, Isolde, Kasha, and the others, each represent different facets of immortal existence. Power, compassion, wisdom, skepticism, protection, eternal youth, passion. They are predators and persons, monsters and mentors, dangerous and profound. Together, human and vampire, mortal and immortal, they stand at eternity's edge and dare to imagine a future neither could build alone.